Hey everybody. Okay, so I am joined today by Eve Turow-Paul. We'll do a formal introduction in just a moment. Before we get started with her presentation, I'm going to go ahead and maybe just share out a couple of things that we thought would be sort of useful. So this is, I think, episode 5 or 6 of our second season of the Datassential webinar. We call it the Simply Smarter webinar. And as a reminder, this is all about you. So it's not so much about myself or Eve or whoever's on camera, but it's about the community that you all represent and form. We typically have, 1,000 plus professionals in the food community, whether it's, you're working with a food service manufacturer or a distributor or a CPG company or a retailer or an operator, you're all in there, but you're all food pros. And this is just a great way to sort of share your experiences and questions and thoughts and just give each other a giant group hug, essentially. So please use that chat and just remember to select all panelists and attendees when you chat so that everyone can see what you're posting in chat. As a reminder, our next webinar is going to be on September 17th. That's 2 Thursdays from now. Again, at noon Central. We got some really cool stuff that planned for that I'll tell you about in a little bit. And I thought I'd maybe just kick today off with some updated COVID stats that we've been asked for. So many of you and many parents around the country may be enjoying the absolute joy of working from home with their kids, staying in the house at the same time. It is a glorious, joyful event that I think we all really love. And we wanted to share maybe just some quick numbers around what this looks like for the foreseeable future. So this is how parents plan to school their kids this fall. Of course, this can change, right? And you see, schools that are open, maybe they close. Colleges, for instance, that have been open, there's this very close watch on, does a case break out? Do we have to shut things down? Do we go to distance learning? But for parents that have kids in the household, this is, as of a few days ago, how they plan on schooling their kids this fall. Over 1/2 say it would be full-time remote schooling. So it's not, so this is not a minority thing. This is the majority. And then another 30% roughly say it's going to be some mix of in-person schooling and being remote. So what does that actually mean for food and for restaurants? Well, I don't want to just share a couple of quick stats and then we'll get on to Eve's presentation. And these are just some things to think about, right? So, you're at home, your kids are at home with you. What does that mean for how you're going to behave around food and how you might be going about acquiring food and what you have? Here's three quick numbers for you. Number one is that about 38% of parents say that they're pretty much going to turn to hot meals for their kids' lunch, as opposed to maybe previously they would have, packed a lunch or something cold like a, pre-made sandwich or something. That lunch has gone from basically cold to hot in a big number of cases. Here's the other key thing, is that most parents, 56%, if they have kids that are going to be at home with them for the fall, they say, we're going to eat the same thing our kids eat, right? So this is actually a pretty different dynamic. It was probably pretty unlikely that as a parent, you were eating the same lunch as your kid in pre-COVID times. But now it essentially becomes a shared meal, which reveals, I think, new types of opportunities, regardless of which side of the business that you're on. What can you do with product and promotion that says, hey, here's something that's going to be great for both you and your kids at lunchtime, because this is going to be the majority behavior among people with kids at home for the fall. Then about 1 in 5 say that they're going to increasingly look toward restaurants more often for daytime occasions, such as lunch, specifically as a consequence of having their kids at home now. So it's really not just about how do you feed the kids, it's about how does adult consumption change given that they're now with their kids throughout the day. And I think it's something that I haven't seen a lot of brands or companies really give a ton of thought to yet. But these are not tiny numbers, like the 1, 2, 3% type numbers. There's like 20, 30, 40, 50% numbers that speak to a fairly dramatic opportunity. So you may want to just start brainstorming about what do we do to pursue that opportunity. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, and that would be Eve Turow-Paul. Eve always does this really cool thing where she prepares her presentation in a format called Canva, which I've never used, and I feel sort of dumb for not having used it because it's so cool, but it's like an animated PowerPoint. You might get a little bit of a stutter because we're looking at this, over a web stream, but it looks great in person. And Eve, are we okay to just share this link out with people after the fact so they can also see this, or?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Yeah. So I think many of you have either encountered Eve directly in the past or have seen her in a previous episode of this webinar. She's fantastic, and instead of me just going on with platitude after platitude, I think I'd just say hi to Eve and have you introduce yourself real quick and take us through all the great things you have in store for us today.
Awesome. Thanks, Jack. And I am fascinated by those stats, because one of the homework assignments you gave me was to think about workplace dining. And what is, workplace dining going to look like moving forward? And, these are just kind of new nuggets to chew on as we also think about, well, if people are going to be transitioning their lunch experience at home with their kids over time, how is that going to shift expectations once they do return to work?
Yeah.
Real quick, should I be sharing my screen or are you going to share?
I haven't shared out, so you should be able to see your slides on my screen right now. Do you see that?
I am not. I am seeing still the hot meals.
Oh, so it's going to make me reshare. It's been doing that lately. I don't know why it does that. So how about now?
Yes, now I see it.
All right. Okay.
Super. All right, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so that's me with my baby. My name is Eve Turow-Paul. I am a food writer. I've been writing about restaurants, recipes, things of that nature for a long time, but about 10 years ago, I became more obsessed with the human behavior aspect of food culture, really looking at what are the emotions that are driving our food obsessions. I am a researcher. I do my research qualitatively using mostly, journalistic methods of interview and ethnography, but also have tapped the brilliant minds at Datassential to do some quant over the last couple of years. And it's been a lot of fun to be able to also test my theories with some solid stats instead of borrowing exclusively from others. I also work as a brand consultant for Fortune 500 companies and startups as well. I am the founder of the Food for Climate League, which I will be introducing here a little bit. I am a millennial. I graduated from college in 2009, and I'm a mama to an 11-month-old baby. Next slide. So, as I just said, my obsession is with the why. Why are we buying avocado toast? Why is everyone making sourdough bread? Why are we buying baby chickens as the start of the pandemic came into focus? And that's really where I've been spending all of my time and attention over the last 10 years. Next slide. And again, I'm focusing these days on food, but also on other lifestyle trends that are tangentially related. Because to me, all of this is woven together. I work based off of the assumption that if any of us are choosing to spend our discretionary time and money on something, there's a good reason why. Millennials are often made fun of. I think it's really easy to point your fingers and say, like, haha, how silly is it that they're drinking a CBD matcha latte instead of saving up to buy a house. I have taken the time to say, well, okay, yes, maybe not the best financial decision, but what is it about that product or that experience that makes people feel as though it's worthwhile? So I look at everything from those CBD matcha lattes to the uptick in astrology, or cancel culture or Korean trend of mukbang, which I know is something that Jack and Datassential have also done some research on. You can go to the next slide.
Yeah, I got a question for you, Eve.
It's hard to hear you, Jack.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
I can vaguely hear you.
Maybe the bigger question is, can other people hear me or not?
Yeah, far away audio. Okay, I'm not alone.
How about now?
Nope.
All right. Well, Eve, you take it away, and I'll try to figure this out while you go.
Okay. So, also, Jack, you can feel free to send me questions in the chat. About 5-6 years ago, I published my first book, A Taste of Generation Yum. This really was a passion project. It actually was my master's thesis, and that I just became completely obsessed with and turned it into a book, kept doing research after I graduated. And just this past June, I published Hungry, Avocado Toast, Instagram Influencers, and the Modern Search for Connection and Meaning. And in Hungry, I was able to take the initial theories that I developed through A Taste of Generation Yum and extrapolate upon them. I was able to take my research international. I was able to look at these trends in millennials, but also outside of that. A Taste of Generation Yum really was focused on, those born between 1980 and 1996. And over time, after the book came out, what I began to realize is that the things that I was focusing on, it wasn't so much about millennials per se. It was instead about the impact of technology on our lives and how much our existence has shifted since the introduction of the digital age. And so that's what I explore in Hungry. And as I previously mentioned, I also had the awesome opportunity to not just do research through the normal journalistic channels, but I also had the chance to work with Datassential on an original study. So we put together the Hungry study. A bunch of the stats are in the book, but we actually found so much interesting information that we put together a 70-page report that I'm really proud of. I continue to go back to it time and time again in my own work. And that is also available for purchase separate from Hungry the book. Next slide. As I also mentioned briefly, I am the founder of the Food for Climate League. This is a nonprofit that I founded last year. And we are working very specifically on the narrative around climate smart eating. And I'm going to get into a little bit later in the presentation what exactly that means and why it is gaining in relevance in this current cultural moment. So we can go back to basics, and I apologize if you've seen me talk before. This is usually where I start out because it is the baseline that we kind of all need to wrap our heads around, in my opinion. Everything that I do these days, I bring myself back to these basic questions. What needs motivate human behavior? What are those core essential things that are driving the trends that we see today? This triangle that you see up on there on your screen, that's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm bringing you back to Psych 101, laying the foundation here. Maslow was one of the first psychologists to do research not just on what makes us unwell, but what makes us thrive. He really was the first person to say, well, okay, us psychologists shouldn't just be spending our time diagnosing what's wrong with us. Like, let's really look at what the psychological features are of people who feel like they've lived well, who feel like they are thriving and flourishing in life. And he came up with the hierarchy of needs. I've spent the last few years looking at Maslow's work, but also evaluating other trends of well-being, theories around well-being in psychology, but also in religion and sociology. And what I found is that all of these theories really kind of synthesize down into 3 buckets. So you can go to the next slide.
Eve, can you hear me okay now, or am I still?
No.
Still working on it.
Okay. You can send me questions in the chat. I can open it up. So these are really our core needs. Through many years, again, of doing, I would say, kind of like an analysis, a landscape analysis of theories of well-being, these 3 buckets emerge over and over and over again. And I call these just our human truths. We all embody these three innate needs. We have a craving for a sense of control and safety, a sense of community and belonging, and a sense of purpose and meaning in life. And to me, now that I've done this research, I'll be honest, I see these three motivations in everything. I'm just gonna look at Jack's question. Are there any food trends you would say line up with the self-actualization? Absolutely. So I have a little bit on this a few slides in, but self-actualization part in terms of food really means what food trends today are helping people build a new skill, explore something about themselves. To me, a lot of what we've been seeing during COVID, this emphasis on sourdough, learning a new skill, or even learning to garden, all of those things feed into human flourishing and self-actualization. Next slide. So the question that I've been asking myself is not just what are our basic needs, but once you have a grasp on what those well-being needs are, we then have to ask ourselves, well, okay, how does our current environment impact our abilities to meet these vital needs? Again, in going back to what people choose to spend their discretionary time and income on, to me, each of those things represents a hunger. There's a need that's going unmet. So what is it about our environment today that is impacting our ability to meet these innate needs? Next slide. In Hungry, I do a deep dive into the impact of technology on well-being. I look at how things like email, 24/7 news notifications, the access to information that we have, how that is impacting our ability to meet our most basic well-being needs. Jack, when you can, next slide. So part of what I have found is that these digital innovations, it says, Jack, disable auto adjust. We're trying to get it so that we can hear Jack again. Can we hear you?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Buck. Disable auto adjust did it. You did tell us. Thank you. Okay.
Welcome back to the party, Jack.
I felt silenced and yeah, that didn't feel good.
We're happy to have you back.
Okay.
So in Hungry, again, I'm going through what the impacts are of this new digital world on our well-being needs. And in part, I became really fascinated with this topic because when I started to do my original research on millennial food trends, the thing that I kept running into were discussions about rising rates of stress, of anxiety, of depression, loneliness. And in Hungry, I had the time to go through why it is that we are seeing a rise in all of those different emotional ailments in this digital age. Next slide. We are seeing each of these issues reflected in the food trends today. So Jack, this goes to what you were asking about in terms of self-actualization. I'll start over on the side though with control, right? The opposite of control is anxiety and stress. The world today feels incredibly out of control. And I'll talk a bit about the context of 2020, but when I say today, meaning this digital age, right? People were already anxious prior to this. I mean, try to wrap your head around the rates of anxiety now, that's gonna be a whole other topic. But we've seen people try to regain a sense of control through food culture, right? They're asking for transparent labels, for simple ingredients, things they understand, and things that simply feel safer. And sometimes that translates into people gravitating towards items that are, quote, natural or anti-GMO, not because they understand the science of GMO, but in fact because they don't understand the science of GMO and therefore don't want it in their bodies. Again, it's about how are people using food as a coping mechanism for this digital age in order to meet their most basic well-being needs.
So Eve, on the topic of control, do you have to make choices that are, let's say, personal to you to feel a sense of control, or is it okay to just get what everybody else is getting?
If it's going to be, if I think I understand your question, if you're kind of joining in on a trend,
Yep.
that's more so about community and less about control. So the other thing that should be under control that's not here is comfort foods. So there's really the two ways that people find a sense of safety through their food choices. Either it's by carefully dictating what goes in their bodies, or it's by using food as like a comfy blanket, like a self-soothing kind of mechanism. I often get questions about like, well, why is it that millennials are, going for kale salads and also indulgent mac and cheese? And at the end of the day, both of those decisions are driven from a place of anxiety. It's just different ways of addressing it.
Is a lot of it just sort of feeling like as a person that I made some sort of a decision, or I had some say in what I'm having?
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, again, like writing this book gave me the time to do all this like major deep dive into the psychology of this. And I found it absolutely fascinating to look into how we are so hardwired to find order in chaos. And a lot of what we are seeing in food and lifestyle culture today is people attempting to create order where there is no order. Yeah. And sometimes it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but we find it soothing. And part of this exploration for me was also, again, it's taking a step away from pointing your fingers and saying, ha ha, like, look at you, and instead looking back at, well, all of these things are driven by our natural tendencies as human beings. And so for a lot of people, being able to put up guardrails, I'm going to eat this and not that, is giving people a sense of autonomy in a world where a lot of people don't feel like they have a lot of power.
Here's a question, and maybe I don't know if there's any hard data on this, but what happens when someone used to say, I'm going to eat this and not that, and then a year later they decide I'm going to eat that and not this? Do they still feel a sense of control, or do they have like internal conflict?
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is actually extremely common. So this is like a big trend too in the vegan versus paleo community. Both veganism and paleo are, first, they're values-based diets, but they're also very much a conduit to a sense of control. And there's a lot of people who have gone from being vegans to the paleo diet. There's even like a subset of people who are former vegans who are now butchers. And I actually think that it plays into this sense of control because it's you deciding. It is your decision, right? You are dictating what you eat. You can change your mind about it, but you are the person who's steering the ship.
So from a personality perspective, let's say control-based eating, do you think it's more for the control freaks, for us out there that want to control everything, or the people that have no control and use this as their one place of control?
I think it's both. I mean, I think that, this idea of control in food, I think it reminds a lot of people of eating disorders. And there are a lot of aspects of this that are reflective of disordered eating, but that's not to say that we're a generation of disordered eaters. There's just very little in our lives today that we feel like we have control over. For example, I have no idea how the internet works. I really don't. Like, my life depends on it, but I have no idea how it functions.
Does anybody?
Yeah. Right. Beyond that, I don't feel like I have a ton of control over pretty much anything these days, right? Like, the trajectory of my life in general feels like very out of my hands, but I can decide what I feed myself every day. I can decide what I feed my daughter. And those little nuggets are really important to our basic mental well-being.
I mean, it seems like there's something in life where things are happening to us, right? Like the content we consume online is being pushed to us,
right?
Us selecting it, right? I think, there's some methods of shopping where stuff just arrives at your door that you didn't order, it just sort of refills itself.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the really interesting things too around control and anxiety was seeing also how, so rising rates of distrust in government and institutions and big business has also correlated with people wanting to regain control. So in our modernized food system, right? I mean, evolutionarily, we want to know our food because food is dangerous, right? Like as an animal through evolution, we need to know that what we're putting in our mouths is safe. Okay, over the last 100 years, we've given that kind of safety metric over to other institutions and companies. We've said, here, we're gonna trust you to feed us things that are good for us. Over the last 10 years, you've seen those rates of trust plummet, and therefore people are trying to regain that sense of personal control over what it is that they're eating.
Yeah, that's a good point. Food is historically extremely dangerous, right? Can you
Yes.
imagine being the first person to ever eat a lobster? It's like, hey, Bob, you go eat that.
Yeah. Good luck, have fun. Let's see what happens. Yeah. But I mean, I think about that all the time as well with my child, because, you know, she will, again, like as part of the research in this book, I looked into like, well, okay, evolutionarily, like how does this all work? How does it originate, and how does it show up in today's preferences? If she won't eat something that's in front of her, I eat a little bit of it, and after she can see that I've eaten it, she'll eat it. And that's documented in studies. That's one way to expand your child's palate. It's a safety issue. Can you actually go back one slide?
Yeah.
So the other two areas beyond control, just hit on them really quick. The other one here is community. Contrary to what a lot of people think, over the last decade, with the introduction of social media, we've become lonelier. We are more quote unquote connected instead of actually connected. And people have been looking to food culture as a way to facilitate a sense of belonging. Sometimes that's being done online through likes by following certain influencers. And sometimes that's happening in person. It's going to restaurants that now suddenly have an open kitchen and shared tables and shared plates. People are living with each other, right? Co-living has been a major, major trend over the last decade. And then we have the third kind of column here, which is purpose. It's been kind of crazy to watch the Google searches for how to find meaning in life just on this upwards trajectory since we received the internet. And part of the reason why there are more meaning seekers today is because the facets of screen-based living, of virtual living, they don't feed those core aspects of what we need to feel fulfilled. We are not stimulating our senses. We are not creating tangible things. It's very hard to see our progress, and we're spending more time indoors. Those are all working against our feelings of empowerment and skill building and self-actualization we were talking about. So what do we see with the rise of the digital age? We also see a rise of people saying, I'm not going to go to the store. I'm going to figure out how to do that myself. Or even adult coloring books, right? This is like a combination of anxiety and a desire for purpose, right? You can create something really beautiful. Another really big part of this is people bringing the outdoors in, or simply turning off their screens and going outside. In summary, food has become a coping mechanism, right? So if you go back to Maslow's hierarchy, food used to be just at the bottom as this thing for sustenance. Food's not just sustenance anymore. Food is a conduit to well-being. And I find it very important to say to everybody on this call, there has never been a more important time to work in the food industry. What you guys do is really important. It's not just feeding people on a physical level. Food is feeding people on an emotional level.
So it's an interesting thing, because I think historically you look at, food and tastes and flavors that work well together, and that's an important aspect. Should we also be looking at, let's say, the emotional needs that certain types of food deliver against?
Yes, absolutely. And that's what we had the chance to start exploring in the Hungry study. I had the chance to work with this awesome team at Datassential, and we were able to look at, how do rates of anxiety correlate with different food behaviors, or rates of loneliness correlate with different food behaviors? To me, I think especially coming out of this year where these rates of anxiety, of loneliness, of meaninglessness are just skyrocketing. To me, it's essential to not just look at flavor, but also look at how these basic emotional human needs are going to be reflected and are currently being reflected in this COVID culture. So over the last decade, innovation has been critical to keep up with these millennial-driven food trends. That's why I have a job. I've been brought in to international organizations over the last 5-6 years, especially, of folks saying, like, what the heck do we do, right? We've had to throw the playbook out the window. Right now, that cycle of innovation is starting over again because the world has changed yet again. Every single one of us is living through a moment of disruption, which means that our habits and behaviors are changing because our needs, our cravings, our hungers are changing on a physical and emotional level, which means that each of us within this industry need to start thinking differently. So now we'll just go a bit into how the events of 2020 are impacting food culture right now. So before I went through the digital age woes, now on top of that, we have what I just call the 2020 woes. We have obviously health concerns. There are more and more people dealing with unemployment. Hunger should also be on here. I just read a statistic this morning that 1 in 8 American households is food insecure right now. People are overwhelmed. We are increasingly isolated. Social justice issues are coming front and forward. We're also spending way more time indoors. What is that doing to our well-being? Well, it's bumping up general rates of stress and fear. I have overwhelm on both sides, I'm just now realizing, but I think that that's valid. I've been seeing a number of stats saying that people are overwhelmed just by the basic concept of coping with day-to-day issues, whether that's working from home or keeping up on the latest news related to COVID. People are also incredibly lonely.
Yeah. This is a sort of a side question. I wonder if you have a theory on this. I mean, it seems like everyone feels like 2020 feels like just a super long year.
Yes.
Things are moving in slow. Is that really because, let's say, the news hasn't been great, or is it because we've been stuck at home more?
It's a good question. I mean, the way that I've been thinking about this is, like when you're in the car and you're going someplace new or whatever, you don't have to be in a car, you're traveling someplace new. And the ride just feels really long because you don't actually know when you're going to get there. And then on the way back, you're like, God, that was so fast.
Yes. Yeah.
To me, all of us right now are in the car, we're on the journey, and we just have no idea when we're going to get there. And so it feels like it's taking forever. I think that if we knew when it would be safe for us to send our children back to school in person without masks, that it wouldn't feel so long. But right now we don't have a metric of saying like, oh, we're halfway there. Who knows? We might be, or we might be a quarter of the way there or an eighth of the way there.
That's a really good way of putting it. I guess for me, when I think about that, I'm like, yeah, obviously we want things to be good. At the same time, you don't want life to totally fly by and you blink and all of a sudden it's over either. So is there something we can learn from this to make us appreciate, let's say, each day going forward, so we have a little bit of slow motion in our lives, but the remaining years we have left feel a little bit longer.
Buck just put in a silver lining there, being able to spend more time with family. And I think that for a lot of us, that is a benefit. I welcomed my daughter in September of last year, and my husband would have been back at work, but he's gotten to spend most of her first year of life at home. And he's not going to get to do that if we have another kid. He's going to be like, hey, nice to see you for the first 3 weeks of your life, and I'm going back to work. So I do think that there are a lot of, for those who, I should need to caveat, who have enough to eat, who are not immediately concerned about their safety well-being, their basic safety, there are silver linings. And I think it is interesting also to think about as people start to leave their homes more and also start to look to food culture for these different well-being needs, I think it is important to think about, like, how can we help people enjoy those silver linings? So this is kind of a similar list to what I had presented before, but this time just focusing on what we've seen over the last 6 months, give or take, right? So how are people using food to create a sense of control in their lives right now? Convenience is a big part of this, delivery, right? Give me a subscription, have it arrive at my door. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to go to the store. Hoarding was definitely a control mechanism during the first few weeks. I myself went on like the biggest shopping trip ever. About 2 weeks actually before everyone else did, because I was on a phone call with a client in China and was just like, this is going to be no bueno. And I became afraid, and I was like, okay, I need to feel a sense of security. And so I just basically bought everything in the grocery store. The other thing that people are doing is they're looking for immune boosting foods, right? We go over this in the Hungry study. You have another report, I think, available through Datassential about the rising interest in immune boosting foods. It's also about comfort, right? Like, again, like we've wanted to just wrap ourselves in a blanket. I was on a call the other day and mentioned SpaghettiOs, and someone was like, yes, but they ran out of a certain kind of SpaghettiOs at my local store. And I was like, oh, I was just using that as an example, but she actually had gone out and bought SpaghettiOs, her and a lot of other people. The other thing that people have been doing is wasting less food. And this is a control mechanism. This is a tactic to not have to go to the grocery store for most people, or to save money, right? Why throw something away right now? There is absolutely no reason. Community, how is this coming to life? To me, I think the most vibrant way it's been coming to life is through these baking trends of, like, it seemed like everyone was baking the same things every week during the first few weeks of quarantine. It was like the first week was sourdough, then it was banana bread, then it was babka, and then it was garden focaccias.
And that's entirely social media that drives that specific behavior,
Yes.
right?
Yes. 100%. And there, in many ways, so through my research over the last few years and looking at the impact of the digital age on our feelings of community, it has really exacerbated all the worst things in us. It's made us feel lonelier. It's made us feel more envious, more jealous. I have to say, COVID, a global pandemic, has made social media a friendlier place. We are all grieving and suffering together. And social media has become a place where people can go to find tips. A lot of people have been trying to help each other out, give each other inspiration and different ideas. It's also been really interesting to me, when this all started, I had a few folks say to me, like, oh, restaurant culture is dead. And I was like, no, it's not. Like, there's no way that restaurant culture is going to be dead, because we need restaurants as a way to connect with other people. And you're seeing that. Right? People, at least where I'm in Chicago, I have Division and Chicago Avenue on either side of me. I'm giving specifics because I see that there's a lot of Chicagoland people on the call. They are chock full of people every day, right? And you're risking your safety at this point by going out to eat. You're risking the safety of the person who is serving you, but people find that it is worthwhile because they want to see people. They want to get out. They want to have a sensory experience. They want to have that community. Purpose, again, people trying to find a sense of meaning. I think also during this period of time when the passing of time just doesn't seem like how do you know the time is passing, that you're making progress? I think for a lot of people, starting a garden has been a really great way of saying, like, aha, that's grown, time has passed, or, oh, I've learned a new skill, or I've made something and I get to feed my family, and it fills people with that sense of pride.
Yeah, and I'm embarrassed because I'm paid to know this stuff, but I might have missed the chicken thing. Can you tell us what that is?
What?
Yeah.
It was there. Okay, so many of the farms across the United States that sell baby chickens, they sold out. In the same way that pet adoption skyrocketed. I don't know if you also read about, like, the kennels that were running out of cats and dogs. The same thing has happened with chickens within the first few weeks. So it was, to me, in part a control aspect of people wanting to have a food source, right? Having eggs at home. But I think it was also just like, okay, I'm at home all the time. I'm going to get to know how to raise chickens. And caring for something is also a way to facilitate a sense of meaning in your life.
Oh, wow. Cool. I did miss that one. Thank you.
Yeah. Right now, we're living in a world of unknowns. This is often called a VUCA world. I don't remember if I chatted about this last time, but a volatile, uncertain, I can't remember the abbreviations for the other ones, but I can send it out to people if they want to know. Basically, a world chaotic and I can't remember what the other one is. Yeah, complex, thank you. What's the A? Someone will know the A. We don't know what's going to happen at this point, but for me, the way that I am able to make sense of what's happening right now and project what's going to happen in the future is by going back to those core fundamental human needs, right? Again, those are not changing. And so the question becomes, how are people going to be fulfilling those needs in the future? Those questions are, what will people want to eat? How will they be engaging in food culture? One of the questions is, what's the future of restaurants? Like, is this the future of restaurants? You have on one side here, this is Creator, which is like the hamburger robot restaurant in San Francisco. They created this machine within the first couple weeks, I actually think of the first week of lockdown in San Francisco. That was, you went up, you placed your order, and then through this like vacuum sealed machine, you were handed your food. Right. And then on the right, you have a concept by a designer for restaurants. This is a concept, but I've seen similar things actually being put to use, especially in Asia right now. I think a lot of people are like, well, is this it? Like, is this what our new future is going to be? You can go to the next slide. Yeah. This is my guess of things that you should be looking for. I guess based on a lot of previous research. People are going to, again, be aiming to fulfill these core basic needs. How can restaurants deliver on that sense of control and safety? People are going to be looking for places that are sanitary, baseline, that feel safe. I believe people are also going to be demanding of food companies that labels and products are transparent and simple, right? We have enough information to parse through right now. Our anxiety levels are high enough. Give me control over what it is that I am putting in and on my body. Same thing there for immunity. People want to gain a sense of control over their own health. If they can gain that sense by eating something that's super nutrient rich, a supplement that's going to be providing that sense of control, that's what they're going to go for. And I don't think that the boost in comfort foods is going away. In terms of community and loneliness, right? Rates of isolation continue to go up. People are figuring out how to create a sense of belonging when we can't be together. They're moving out of this current pandemic. I do think that those trends of shared plates, shared tables, shared spaces will come back, although that probably won't be for a few years. In the meantime, though, I think these bottom four are going to start to take the lead. I'm expecting that there's going to be a lot more emphasis on your local community, your local purveyors, your local talent, your local flavors. People who want to create that sense of belonging where they are. I also think that the social justice movements that we have seen happening over the last several months are going to be encouraging people to think about what makes them different and what makes them beautiful, what makes their home different, what makes their home beautiful, and starting to celebrate that. In terms of purpose, right, again, people are inside, spending a lot of time on screens, they're not having a lot of sensory stimulation, not a lot of time outdoors. I do think that people will be looking to food culture for those hands-on immersive experiences. I think it's also going to be a way for people to express their value systems and make impact locally. Right? Again, it's about creating a sense of autonomy and efficacy for people. Food is a great way of doing that. Again, one of the challenges Jack gave me is he was like, what's the future of workplace dining? And I was like, that's a really, really interesting question, especially as we think about a blended work from home model. All right, a lot of the people that I've talked to, and I'm eager to know what other people are experiencing, a lot of people I talked to have said that their employers have said that they never need to come back into the office full time, even once this is over. Right? That's changing the game for food service providers, because you all still have the challenge of meeting the needs of those employees, but now you have to figure out how to do it on a blended model. So I've been thinking about, well, okay, what are the requirements, the desire is going to be of those services? In terms of control in the workplace, a lot of employers are going to be saying, how can you help our employees have high energy, right? How do you keep people motivated, keep people going? How do you help them with their immunity? And also, it's all about convenience, right? How can you help people be more productive with their time? Community. How are we going to create community virtually? It's possible. I can tell you that it's possible. But that's going to be a major challenge also for food service providers. I do also expect that there is going to be a very different focus on diversity and inclusion that is going to reach the foods that we eat. The way that things are presented on a menu, the items that are available to people. We can't think that the social justice movement is just happening in a corner and staying over there. It is going to impact the foods that we are eating and what people are expecting to see. In terms of purpose, again, how do we help people build new skills, increase their passion for sustainability, get hands-on engagement through food culture? This really is a moment for crazy innovation, for really imaginative thinking, because each of us needs to have these basic needs fulfilled in order to find well-being, right? We've been relying on these services to help us get there in the past. We are still relying on them now, but now the game has changed.
It's, so many of us are on Zoom so much throughout the day, or Microsoft Teams, or whatever it might be. Wouldn't it be cool if you just like order a burger or something right from there? You're doing your conference call, you press the Zoom burger button and it just shows up. That would be amazing. I think we might actually get there someday.
Yeah, it's also about, like, how can we what is it that we can share with others virtually? And I think it's going to come down to meal times as well.
Yeah, community ordering of food, even though you're getting your food separately at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So these are just some of the trends that I'm predicting we should be watching out for. They're the things that I'll be watching out for. Definitely, I'm expecting a bump in focus on health and immunity. I am also expecting a greater acceptance of science in our foods, and I'm happy to go into that later if you're curious. I'm expecting less alcohol. This is based on, actually most of this is based on the findings from the Hungry study. Just like a quick tidbit takeaway from that is that those who were more anxious were less likely to drink alcohol. It has the inverse effect, especially among Gen Zers. I do think that plant-based is going to continue on the uptick. New attitudes, I think, towards cultural appropriation. Again, there is just a different set of expectations these days. We can't think that the social justice, racial justice movement is going to stay elsewhere. I do think there's a new concept of local, right? You're stuck at home. People are discovering, new aspects of their neighborhood. There is going to be a new emphasis on outdoors, on DIY maker movement. Again, these are things we're already seeing. I just don't expect it to slow down. I am also expecting a new attitude towards sustainability, which I'm going to get into next.
The acceptance of science thing is a good one. It's something we've been talking about, I think, probably for 5 or 6 years now, where at first it was great. The idea of getting something from a farm was awesome. Then it's like restaurants came into the mix. And we said the next big thing is going to be wanting stuff that essentially was born in a science lab somewhere. And you see it with some of the meat alternative products. You see it with some of the immunity boosting types of things. You see it with cellular agriculture and some of these things as well.
Yeah. Trust in scientists is going up right now. And previously it had been down.
Given that we're coming out of this pandemic and a lot of this will hinge on science, do you see that acceptance of science thing being like, medicine in your food type of stuff, or how would you characterize it?
I think that if trust in scientists is going up, and people feel as though they're looking to secure their basic safety needs and they are looking to science for it, I don't see why they wouldn't start to explore these more experimental foods. Yeah, sure, like Soylent Green, just saw pop up. And I also think that it might come around to GMOs. The concept of GMO, the language around it, has become so politicized that I don't think we're going to talk about it as GMOs. Yep. But cellular agriculture, synthetic biology, people are open to that. I mean, look at the Impossible Burger that uses GM ingredients, but it's fulfilling these other needs for people of wanting to reduce their meat consumption. For a lot of people these days, it's just about like how to find something on the shelf that's going to be satisfying in that kind of that comfort way. I think it's going to be a really interesting area to watch for.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things, I think on our last episode, we talked about some of the things that, Gen Z loves that, more than the other generations. And we sort of characterize it, and we see this really clearly in the data, that a lot of it's about like new, unusual, unique types of things or reinventions of things that are just sound odd. And some of those science-based foods would certainly fall into that category. So I'm with you that I think we're going to see a lot more of that.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's purpose-driven too, right? It's not just science for the sake of science. It's science because it helps the world.
Right, exactly. And so, right, exactly. Like Impossible is doing a really great job of shifting the narrative around GM as something that's a sustainability issue.
Yep.
So this is our pitch for the Hungry study, but the work that we were able to do, Datassential and myself last year, for me, it has helped me gain a better understanding of what's happening now, because as luck would have it, we were specifically looking at how anxiety impacts what we eat, how loneliness impacts both what we eat, but also our relationship to influencers, our likelihood to become part of a diet tribe. And then we also looked at how desire for meaning correlates with different hobbies like cooking and baking and gardening. All of these things are super, super relevant right now. And if anyone has interest in the Hungry study, you can go to thehungrybook.com, or you can message Jack or myself.
It's also where you could go buy the book, which everyone
That's
should
true. Get. Yes.
That is the best place to get the book.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'd love you to introduce this.
Okay. So I'm going to kind of circle back around to the Food for Climate League, which is the nonprofit that I founded last year. In part because I had such a good time working with Datassential on my book. I contacted Jack and was like, this is what I'm working on. Do you guys want to be involved? And they are now collaborating with us as partners. We actually ran our first set of questions last week. And this is a completely exclusive piece of data that we got just a couple days ago. We asked people whether they would be interested in purchasing and eating foods that help their local communities or local farmland become more resilient to climate change. And 89% of respondents said that they were somewhat or very interested in this. This was a Gen Pop survey of 1,000 people across the US. To me, this just drives home the fact that in this moment, sustainable eating is not something that we can ignore. There have been, it's been mixed data about whether people are focusing more on the climate right now. There's a lot of theories that people are saying, well, we're worrying about our most basic safety needs right now in person in this moment. So thinking about the climate crisis is not going to be quite as essential. No audio. Can you guys still hear me? I just want to make sure. I just saw something pop up that says no audio. Okay, great. Thank you. So to us, we were sending out a few of these questions because our theory with the Food for Climate League is, well, in fact, we think that there's people who care even more about the climate crisis right now. This particular experience of the global pandemic is for a lot of people showing them the impact that one person can make. It's showing them what a global crisis looks and feels like. You're asking sustainable, but at what price, Don? Come talk to me. I can help you out there. So the real question for me, for you, becomes, how are you addressing sustainable eating? The Food for Climate League is a 501c3 nonprofit. We are a research collaborative, and we're working to make food that's good for us and good for the planet, also good for the bottom line. Don, this is kind of getting to that question. There has been, to me, this really crucial gap between what people are saying they want versus the sales and what's being reflected. We as an organization spent last year doing research sponsored by Google, looking at where that gap lies. Why is it that we have people saying that they're concerned about the climate crisis, people saying that they're obsessed with food, but that when companies are putting out products and initiatives centered around sustainability, that they're not getting the traction that they should be? We have identified a number of potholes in the current way that food and climate is being discussed, is being marketed. And we as an organization are continuing to do research in this particular area, but also working with companies to innovate and prototype different solutions to this.
And Eve, I think one of the core tenets, which I think is what makes it really appealing to me too, is that it operates under the premise that people are sort of self-interested, right?
Yeah.
And it's, how do you find alternative message that tells them how this helps you, as opposed to just something that's, totally philanthropic or good for the world in some way. It just happens to also be great for the world, but it's really about something that appeals to you as a person individually.
Right. So I've been taking the research that I've done over the last decade, and I'm applying it here with the Food for Climate League, together with a stellar team. Can you go to the next slide, Jack? And again, weaving in this idea of control, community, and purpose. And I will give you just a very short synopsis of what we found last year. The vast majority of sustainable food products, brands, and campaigns are speaking to only that third core human need of purpose. It's telling people most of the time that you need to give something up in order to do something good. Most sustainable products today are being framed in the negative of less meat, less waste, of removing something from your diet. We see the possibility of reframing the conversation to make sustainable eating relevant to people who are also looking for a sense of control and looking for a sense of community. We are in a brand new world right now. I've heard from a number of people, when are things going to go back to normal? And I have to tell you, I don't think that we're ever going back, because you can't go back. There's going to be a new normal. Just as we're finding a new normal for this moment, there's going to be a new normal for tomorrow. And we need to start thinking about it in that way. We'll go to the next one. So the question that I will leave all of you with is, how can you best meet people's needs today and tomorrow? And how are you going to innovate to meet this current moment, to meet the new world that we are in, just in the same ways that you had to innovate to meet millennial needs and Gen Z needs? We're in a new world. People are craving different things. And my question is just, how are you going to innovate to meet those needs?
Yeah. And if I could sort of help us wrap up over here, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. I do have a couple of things I just want to talk about real quick. One.
Oh, wait, Jack, I forgot one thing.
Yeah.
I should have put it in the presentation, and I'm sorry that I didn't. But Terry, to your question of where you can get your research, the Food for Climate League just released a report last week that includes our toolkit of best practices on how to talk about food and climate. It is available for purchase now, and you can go to foodforclimateleague.org. It is a 70-page report that is chock full of insights, including the landscape analysis we did, expert interviews, and best practices that can be put to use right now.
Yeah, and you can see the slide on screen, right, with the web link on it?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, beautiful. So, I like the pink.
So if you'd like to get involved, I think, Eve, you're still looking for companies to get involved in the cause as well, right? So if you or your companies want to get involved, please go there. We at Datassential thought it was a great cause, and we're partnered as well. And I think you'll get a lot out of it. If I could provide just a couple of quick things for us to close out. One is that you could actually, if you want, get not just the Hungry study, but also a live presentation from Eve, who really is just amazing for your company. If you visit her at thehungrybook.com, or you can email her at the email address that you see here, it makes for a pretty potent 1-2 punch. So if you're, if your company internally is looking to have a great speaker, just talk about something that's really eye-opening, get everyone enthused and thinking about the future, this is a great combination. You get a cool report plus an awesome talk from Eve. And if you're interested, please contact her. And the last little thing that I wanted to throw out as a plug for Datassential, if you haven't done so yet, be sure to download Pocket Snap. You can search for it in the App Store, both iOS or Android. Just search Pocket Snap. It's amazing. And finally, we have a great webinar a couple weeks from now. Mike and Renee are joining us again to talk about this news from the new normal. Like, what are interesting things that restaurants and other places are doing these days now that we've sort of settled into a new reality. If you remember early on, everything was very frenetic and things were changing week to week. Seems like we've settled in a little bit. So what are some successful places doing? So with that, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Eve, thank you so much. You're amazing. And
Thanks for having
everyone.
me.
We'll see you all real soon. Bye, everybody.